on the international scene.
Consider the stunning case of Kazakhstan and how American uranium ended up in the hands of the Russians. Remember businessman and Clinton friend Frank Giustra? Well, he figures in this story too.
On September 6, 2005, Bill Clinton shows up in Kazakhstan, where Frank Giustra, a Canadian investor, has been trying to get control to buy a couple of uranium mines. And he became really partners in a way with Bill Clinton, working on philanthropic activities.
I came to him with an idea about creating an initiative to alleviate poverty.
Furthermore, Frank Giustra has been involved in helping to facilitate speaking engagements for the Clintons.
Frank Giustra and Bill Clinton were whisked to the presidential palace of President Nazarbayev in Kazakhstan. And it's a fascinating story because everybody walked away from the table that night with something.
The story caught the attention of Pulitzer Prize-winning New York Times reporter Joe Becker.
What President Nazarbayev got was this huge propaganda coup. Bill Clinton basically endorsed the progress that Kazakhstan had made in terms of their own democracy, which was sort of interesting given that President Nazarbayev was elected with 90+% of the vote in an election that was widely criticized as being rigged.
Bill Clinton has a public press conference with President Nazarbayev where he praises his rule and praises his human rights record. But the bottom line is, after they leave, a couple of days later, Frank Giustra gets his uranium concessions, which end up being enormously lucrative to him and to a small group of Canadian mining investors.
His company was like a bit player and really had gone from a worthless shell company overnight, got this huge uranium mining deal. And then soon after that, Bill Clinton got a huge donation, $31 million from Frank Giustra to his charitable foundation, followed by a pledge to donate $100 million more.
Our calls to the Kazakhstan embassy were never returned. We talked to Frank Giustra, who told us he considers this an old story and said that he's not interested in politics. Meanwhile, his defenders insist that no undue influence was exerted in Kazakhstan because the deal did not require the Kazakh government's approval.
The problem is there are corporate records that indicate very, very clearly that the Kazakh government did have to sign off and approve. And in fact,
that's what we're looking at here.
That's exactly. This is what we're looking at here, which is the amended.
And there's a postscript to the Kazakhstan tale.
Kazakh officials wanted to take an equity stake in Westinghouse, which is a U.S. company that works in the civilian nuclear field.
When you have a sensitive industry like Westinghouse is involved in the nuclear industry, that requires review by the U.S. government.
So the potential investors came to America to see the man who could make things happen.
Frank Giustra arranged for Kazatomprom officials to go to Bill Clinton's house in Chappaqua. When I first contacted both the Clinton Foundation, Mr. Clinton's spokesman, and Mr. Giustra, they denied any such meeting ever took place. And then when we told them, well, we'd already talked to the head of Kazatomprom, who not only told us all about the meeting, but actually has a picture of him and Bill at the home in Chappaqua, you know, and that he proudly displayed on his office wall, they then acknowledged that, yes, the meeting had taken place.
So what happened to Giustra's company that benefited from that deal in Kazakhstan? After a merger, it became a uranium giant called Uranium One. And then the Russians bought it.
Uranium One became very active in acquiring uranium assets actually in the United States itself. By 2008, 2009, they were a particularly attractive target for the Russian government.
And the Russians acquired that target.
They would acquire what would amount to 50% of projected uranium output by 2015.
In other words, Russia now controls what was projected to be up to half of America's uranium.
Now, does Secretary Clinton factor into this?
For that deal to go through, it needs federal government approval, and one of those people that has to approve that deal is Secretary of State Hillary Clinton,
who, as Senator Clinton, was vigorously opposed to these kind of buys from countries into U.S. property.
That's a great point, Brett. You remember the Dubai ports deal, for example, which he was opposed to.
We believe that no foreign government should control our ports.
In this particular case, we're talking about uranium. We're talking about things that relate to the nuclear industry. We're talking about the Russian government.
Which already provides equipment, material to Iran.
That's correct.
Just how deeply those uranium interests were invested in the Clintons was not disclosed by them or their foundation. Schweitzer learned about that by scouring Canadian tax records.
So let's
A Russian company, essentially controlled by Vladimir Putin, will now be in charge of a substantial portion of American uranium. Russia sends uranium to its client state, Iran. So American uranium could well be sent to the very nation we're negotiating with to try to slow its ability to develop a nuclear weapon.